The Witch's Lover. Horror Stories. El Mante de la Bruja. Throughout my life, I have heard tales of legends and myths, stories of mystical creatures and supernatural feats, but none as impressive as that of my own grandfather. My grandfather's stories were always my favorite. They are full of magic and suspense. He kept me attentive at all times, telling me his adventures when he faced the devil on occasion, or when he found a jar full of gold coins. I knew they were all a pack of lies, but the story that hurt him most, to tell me, and with which he suffered the most, was when he told me the day he fell in love with a witch. This is the story of how my grandfather got to know a witch, who became his girlfriend, and was consumed by the darkness of black magic. And I will tell it to you as my grandfather used to tell me every time he finished a story. I swear it's true. My grandfather's name was Mateo. He was a countryman. He knew perfectly the places where you could find animals to hunt. With just a wooden stick he could find water, and when it wanted to rain, he could make the clouds go away, drawing a cross on the ground between jokes, both his grandchildren and his own children said that the same land had given birth to him because he knew every corner of the mountain like the palm of his hand. He grew up in a village lost in the mountains, one of those villages that can only be reached by donkey and several kilometers away from civilization. In that small town, stories of magic, nahuales, witches, and chanaques. And as far as I knew, he never took them seriously until he met Celina, a young witch. Celina was a woman with a mysterious beauty. Her simple look could hypnotize you and keep you that way for a long time. She suddenly appeared in town without warning. Her skin was as white as the moon, pale and with some moles on her neck, and her eyes were two bright emeralds. The witch's entente. That was how grandfather described her every time he remembered her. In spite of looking so young, it was said that she had lived many lives and knew so many secrets to keep her so young and beautiful. It was in this way that she began to be called the Witch of San Ignacio. But for my grandfather, who had been captivated by her beauty, it didn't matter. In fact, he found her somehow attractive. The sentiment was even reciprocated as the woman took an interest in my grandfather. They began to spend time together, and as the days went by, little by little, their connection became very deep and passionate. My grandfather, who at that time was just turning 17, didn't care if the love of his life was older, because Celina never wanted to mention her age. She assured him that she beat him by several years. As much as my grandfather tried to get information out of her about his origin, Celina always found a way to turn the conversation around, hiding the truth from him somehow. My grandfather's parents and his siblings assured him several times that he was messing with a witch. But he didn't want to give importance to people's gossip. For him, the whole town was always envious of their relationship. One day, at dusk, my grandfather's sister, Jacinta, went to fetch water from the stream as it was almost dusk. It was almost certain that there would be no one there. However, as she got closer, she began to hear the whispers of a conversation. She didn't think much of it because it was normal for people to stay by the stream to talk. But when she arrived at the place, she couldn't identify where they were coming from. He started to get scared, so he quickly threw the bucket into the stream, and when he wanted to take it out, he felt that the water was very hot. He even managed to see how the whole stream began to steam. The water was almost boiling. The whispers became more intense, but he could not understand them, especially the male voice, in that he could notice that in the distance On the stream were walking two people. One of them was wearing a white robe, while the other person was much taller than the other, seemed to hold something in. His right hand, something like a trident, was when he detected the most frightening. That subject of almost 2 meters high turned out to be the devil himself. He was walking on the stream, and steam was emanating from around his legs. He could not move. He was like that all the time until both noticed his presence. It was when my great-aunt Jacinta realized that the person in white was Celina. She left the stream as best she could, but when she was on her way home, the devil himself appeared in front of Jacinta, blocking her way. She could distinguish that his face was of an intense red color, like blood itself. The black pupils were nailed in her, and suddenly she could no longer speak. She had become speechless. At that, she saw how Celina approached the devil and gave him a kiss. They both walked away from where they came from. The rumor began to spread through the town that my great-aunt Jacinta had seen death itself, and because of that, she had been struck dumb by the fright. My grandfather told us that she seemed to be enchanted because she did not move an inch of her body. She had been found sitting on the bank of the stream without saying a word about why she was there. As much as her brothers tried to make her talk, nothing happened. She continued with a lost look and without opening her mouth. My grandfather and Celina had already been together for some time. He told Celina what had happened with her sister Jacinta in the stream. That was when Celina confessed that maybe it was her fault that her sister was like that. She confessed that she was a witch, and that night she was dressed in white because she was preparing white magic. She showed him her power. She took a small flower from the floor, and with a single touch, it withered. Although my grandfather was scared, he was also fascinated by what he had just seen. Even so, he accepted Celina for what she was. That night, when my grandfather arrived home, he broke the news that Celina was a witch. Apparently, he was the only one who took it well. But everyone in the family was already afraid of her. Suddenly, Jacinta emitted a slight sound, a whimper that was barely perceptible. Her gaze was fixed on my grandfather, and with great effort, she said, "Your witch's lover is the devil himself." Jacinta told grandfather everything she saw, but he was amused. But with time, he began to notice that Celina began to change. Suddenly, she became an unbearable person. That which fascinated my grandfather became dark and terrifying. My grandfather no longer felt comfortable around her, so he tried to get away from Celina, but something made him change his mind. My great-aunt Jacinta said it was because of the black magic Celina had used against her brother. So, as time went by, my grandfather began to lose the vitality he had. His skin became pale and his eyes lost their youthful glow. He became thin, almost to the bone, but the strongest change he had was with his soul. He became dark and somber. Celina, on the other hand, looked younger and more beautiful. She didn't even see my grandfather anymore. She simply had him sitting on a chair like an ornament of the house. No matter how much resistance he took, Celina was always one step ahead of him. Every time my grandfather tried to break out of that spell, she would only bring him a harsher punishment, with a stronger spell or a curse that he couldn't shake off. My great-aunt Jacinta noticed that every time Celina used magic, grandfather became weaker. Until one day, he couldn't even stand up, and that same afternoon, my grandfather appeared in a fetal position in front of the doors of his parents' house. He had a note that said, "I have no more use for him. He is yours." For several months, my grandfather remained in bed recovering, and while that time passed, several things happened in the village. Jacinta left the house. She never said where she went or who she was leaving. She simply announced that she was leaving the next day. Celina ended up getting together with a burly man who was taller than she was. One day, without anyone expecting it, my grandfather began to scream like crazy. He said that Celina had appeared in front of him and was forcing him to go with her. When they went to see what happened, they only found grandfather in a corner, shaking, full of fear. That afternoon, the house had to be blessed to prevent that witch from ever setting foot in the house again. The tranquility in the town began to be tormented. It was said that everything was a consequence of Celina and her new partner. Especially on full moon days, the animals began to behave strangely. The roosters crowed in the middle of the night, as if the sun had already risen. The animals left their pens and became completely upset. Whispers of fear and anguish were heard in the streets. People avoided going out after nightfall. They were afraid of the Witch of San Ignacio and her lover. My grandfather's condition was not improving. He still continued to say that he could hear Celina whispering in his ear at night, calling him to her side. His nights became restless. He would writhe in bed, repeating over and over that Celina was outside the house waiting for him. He would talk at night, say incomprehensible things, words no one had ever heard before. My great-grandmother prayed endlessly for her son to be delivered from the spell, but it seemed in vain. With each passing day, my grandfather grew paler, thinner, more somber. Although he tried to fight Celina's black magic, he seemed to have lost all hope. One night, the full moon illuminated the starry sky. My grandfather heard noises outside the house. He knew perfectly well that Celina was outside, and it was time to confront her. He searched among his great-grandfather's things for the revolver they used to take care of the land and hid it among his clothes. He was determined to finish with Celina in some way or another, so he walked towards the front door, stumbling with his own steps. He reached the door to open it wide. There, in front of the house, stood Celina, dazzling in her white robe, floating above the earth. Beside her, the devil, her lover, seemed to smile mischievously. My grandfather took a step forward, determined to confront his old love. He did not expect to see his lover there, but there was no turning back. He took out his revolver and pointed it at Celina, determined to end it all at once. There was a deadly silence as Celina looked at my grandfather with her bright, emerald green eyes. My grandfather felt how Celina wanted to get inside his head to make him drop the gun, and when the devil reached out his hand and grabbed Celina by the waist, he was even stronger, making her fall to her knees, screaming for not putting an end to this. But suddenly, a figure appeared out of the darkness. It was Jacinta, my grandfather's sister. She was holding a crucifix in her hand and began to pray fervently. The iron crucifix glowed brightly. Jacinta's words rang out loudly, demanding the witch and the devil to leave in the name of God. The devil released Celina to attack Jacinta, and there was a very intense flash of light, and then the sound of a gunshot. Everything was in darkness again. My grandfather was holding the revolver. Jacinta didn't know what happened because the devil was standing just a few steps away from her, and suddenly we heard someone fall to the floor. Celina had lost her life. The devil turned around and took her in his arms, and then vanished in a flame, leaving an intense smell of sulfur. My great-aunt Jacinta approached grandfather to thank him for shooting, but he looked dumbfounded. He claimed he never raised the gun and never pulled the trigger. It was Celina who controlled him and forced him to do it. From From that night on, things improved. Tranquility returned to the town. For several days, the smell of sulfur persisted but gradually faded away. My grandfather's health returned, and within a month he was once again conquering other women in town. Aunt Jacinta had gone away to recuperate, and during that time she approached curanderous and real white witches who taught her how to deal with black magic. They came to the conclusion that Jacinta no longer wanted to continue living this suffering, and seeing that she was no longer under the devil's control, she took advantage of the moment to end her life. My grandfather's story is one that I always carry with me. It is a story of love and loss, of magic and darkness. It is a story that reminds me that love can be a wonderful gift, but it can also be a curse if not handled carefully. Of all the stories he told us, this was one of my favorites, because he claimed it was true. Thank you for joining us for this spine-tingling story. We hope you found it both thrilling and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this video, please consider participating in our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing it with your friends. Your support goes a long way in helping us create more engaging content for you. Goodbye, and may you always tread carefully in the world of the unknown.